Hello and welcome to today's webinar on IoT security, the tools needed to assess vulnerabilities and how to protect your information. My name is Jeremy Cowan. I'm editorial director and co-founder of IoT Now, and I'm your moderator today. I want to thank the hundreds of you who are joining us live today around the world. We've got a very interesting discussion for you, brought to you by Eris and with independent analysis from Beecham Research. And we have a lot of expertise to call on. First, I'd like to introduce you to Robin Duke-Woolley, who is CEO of Beecham Research, as he will be our first speaker. Hi, Robin.
Hello. Yes, great to be here. Thanks.
And next, allow me to welcome Syed Zaim Hossain, who is Chief Technical Officer at Eris, known to many as Z. It's good to have you here, Z.
Thank you, Jeremy. Glad to be here.
Well, today we're discussing how, as more and more devices are being connected, threats to data and other cyber attacks are becoming more common. This webinar is being recorded and you can access it in about 48 hours or less via IoT-now.com. Before we start, I just want to remind you that this is a truly interactive webinar. We really want to know what you think. So we'll start in a moment with a live poll, and after that we'll see the results immediately. At the end of the speakers' presentations, I'll put your questions to our panel for them to answer live. So starting right now, you can begin sending me your questions for our speakers. And you can carry on doing that at any time during the webinar. Just click on the questions button and type them into the window. I will then put as many questions of yours to our speakers as time allows. So start sending me your questions now. And if you're having any technical issues with audio or slides, you can also use the question window just to get advice from our technical support team. Now first, let's have our audience poll. Please remember your answers are anonymous. None of us can see how you reply. Just click the button beside the relevant answer. And our question today is, which of these is your greatest IoT challenge? We'd ask you to choose just one. Is it coverage, flexibility, data quality, simplicity, analyzing data, or security itself? Obviously, with coverage, we're thinking IoT deployments need the broadest possible coverage to ensure that machines are always connected. Or if your concerns are around flexibility, you may have found that, because IoT deployments have long lifespans, customers need the flexibility to remotely update providers and networks. Data quality, it could be an issue around consistent and resilient data connections without human intervention. By simplicity, we simply mean that customers connecting hundreds of thousands of products need a single service and management platform. In the case of analyzing data, if IoT is about anything, it's about gathering data and making better use of it for your business and for your customers. And under security, well, that's why we're all here today. So the question is, which of these is your greatest IoT challenge? And the answers in so far indicate the greatest number for simplicity. Nearly 20% indicate that customers are searching for a single service and management platform. At 11%, I see that we've got concerns and issues around analyzing data. Interestingly, almost 10% are concerned about coverage, and a smaller percent, 5.6%, around data quality, and just under 3% are they're great at finding the greatest challenges in flexibility. Before we leave that, I just wanted to ask our panelists what their thoughts are. I'm going to come to you first, Robin, if I may. What was your reaction when you saw that result come up just now? Is that in line with what you expected?
Yeah, it's very much in line. So we've been doing some online surveys over the past couple of years, and consistently security is by far the largest concern. So we've got 51.4% here. So simplicity, sorry?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I thought somebody interrupted. So simplicity is clearly something of great interest and coverage as well. I think the analyzing the data is an area that's increasing in importance. I think that people are just getting to grips with getting more data from their solutions and then looking for ways of gaining value from that. So I would expect that one will rise, in fact, over the next few years.
Yeah. Z, what were your thoughts on seeing those results?
I think that I'm pretty much in line with what I'd expected. And the security answer is not surprising given the topic over here. I do believe that the analyzing data line will grow in time because we see a remarkably large number of people getting very concerned about the volume of data that they're generating, and being able to work with the amount of data and use it in productive ways for the purposes for which the application was deployed is a big issue.
Yeah. So the conclusion is the predominant issue is security, but there are other issues that we need to take account of. Well, look, that's been very interesting. In this 1-hour webinar, we obviously want to discuss the security concerns for M2M and Internet of Things, or IoT programs. And we're looking to describe some of the tools that you'll need to assess your vulnerabilities and what you must do to protect your information. Without further ado, it's really time to hear more from the first of our panel, Robin from Beecham Research, after which Robin will hand straight over to Z from Eris. Robin, over to you.
That's great, Jeremy. Thanks very much. So I'm just going to provide a fairly short introduction to the issues. I wanted to identify the differences between M2M security and IoT security, and what we mean as the key challenges, if you like, from IoT security. So we start with this in a normal way, looking at our sector map. So many of you will have seen this map. For those of you that haven't, it shows the key sectors in the M2M landscape, where all of the applications reside in 9 key sectors. And moving swiftly on to our first interpretation, what this slide shows is really a typical M2M application. So we have data typically coming from one type of device at the edge, that's the data part, and then through a form of connectivity, through to the cloud, typically the cloud where there is processing of that data. And then the cloud also is used as a distribution method to get it out to whoever needs that data. So it's very silo-based. It's very much in a particular sector. In fact, it's usually in a particular subsector where all of the devices are very similar. So in a transport type of environment, it could be just trucks in a fleet management type of application. And that would be a typical M2M application. Let me move to the situation for an IoT type of solution, where we are looking to get data from a number of different types of devices and then bring it together to form a more complete solution, or a more complete view of what's going on. Now, it could be, as this diagram shows, different sectors, sort of some from, say, the building sector, the healthcare sector, and from the transport sector. But probably initially it's going to be from different subsectors within the same general sector. So it could be a number of different machines in a smart factory environment, for example, or it could be a number of parallel activities in the transport sector. And then it might also include environmental issues and stuff like that. But basically what we're getting is data from a number of different types of devices which have different security requirements probably, and all coming together into a processing environment where they can be produce sort of value from that data. So we talked about smart city, smart hospitals, smart factory, smart farming, smart vehicles, smart grid, and so forth are typical of the sort of applications that we're thinking of in this sort of environment. So what does that mean then in terms of security? Now, Beecham Research introduced this IoT Threat Map during last year, about the middle of last year. And the first thing is that it shows the different segments or sections of a solution. So looking at the outside looking in, we've got edge devices, all those things that are out there at the network edge, and the sort of threats that can appear for those edge devices. So cyber attacks, physical intrusion, so forth and so forth. Then we have the networks within those, and we have lots of different types of networks, and we should remember that increasingly in the future. So we have cellular, we have fixed line, we have satellites, we have low power, wide area, and all sorts of other networks as well that might form part of the whole solution. And then inside that we've got platforms, both application enablement platforms and connectivity platforms. So this slide was put together when there were about 150 platforms in the market. We now see over 300, so things have moved on quite considerably since then. And then within that we have the sectors that were outlined in the sector slide earlier on. Within that we have system operators and then users and then out to IT and big data. So these are all the shells of activity, if you like, and these are the areas that need to be secure, but both between them and within them. Now, looking at a typical M2M application, we have on the right-hand side a sliver there, which goes through IT and networks as a typical M2M application, and the interfaces are the vulnerable points here. So the interfaces are shown with the red jaggedy lines, and each of the points as you go out needs to be made quite secure. But for an M2M application, that's relatively straightforward because it's quite well bounded. It's quite well understood what the issues are for each of those interfaces. So building an M2M security solution for that is not that difficult. It's not trivial, but it's not that hard. But if you go on then to what we see in a IoT situation, where you have multiple sectors or multiple subsectors involved, then the situation looks rather different. And we've highlighted that in this green diagram here. So here we have multiple routes in to the processing for different types of devices through possibly different forms of connectivity, through different applications, possibly different platforms, and they all need to interwork at the processing side and the big data side. So what does that mean in terms of vulnerabilities? Well, if you abstract it, then you get this sort of diagram which shows all of the interfaces that may need to be protected for that overall solution to work. And as you can see, it's much more complex than the situation in a typical M2M application. And the other thing to bear in mind here is that there might be different security or threat levels for different sectors. So in this particular example, we used consumer and home as one sector, and transportation and healthcare as other sectors. And it's not unrealistic to assume that the security needs for a consumer environment or a consumer type of application would be significantly different to that for a healthcare or a transport sector solution. But if you bring all those things together into one overall solution, then there is a potential vulnerability between those different sectors that needs to be addressed. And at the same time, that's different security threat levels, but also you need to look at it from the point of view of the costs of providing those securities. So again, if the threat level is relatively low, then the costs of providing the security might also be quite low. But if the threat level is higher, then you might need to do more to secure that. So again, we have not only different threat levels across different sectors and subsectors, but possibly different economics as well and costs that need to be taken into account. So those are some of the issues that need to be addressed when looking at IoT solutions as opposed to M2M solutions. And I hope that's not confused everybody, but that is some of the stuff that the industry is now assessing, trying to get to grips with to find a way forward for the IoT markets to develop in the way that we would all like. So I'm now going to hand over to Z, and he's going to take us through the meat of this presentation.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks, Jeremy. Let me go ahead and get started. My agenda today will be a brief overview of who ARIS is for those of you who on the call who might not be familiar with our company. Talk about an overview of security in general, sort of adding to what Robin mentioned, and then talk about end-to-end IoT security as we're approaching it and the kind of solutions that we're looking at to help our customers deploy security solutions in their M2M and IoT applications, and then provide some final comments and thoughts. And then we'll get right into the Q&A after that. So, in general, very quickly, an ARIS overview. Who are we? We're a global IoT technology company, about 175 people, half of whom are in our engineering and operations departments. We are private. Our headquarters are located in Santa Clara. On the other hand, we have operations pretty much in a number of locations around the world and focusing also in the European markets. Our headquarters are in the UK. For the European effort, our headquarters are in the UK, and then we have offices in India. And we have network operation centers in San Jose, California, Vegas. Las Vegas is our secondary site, our attached site to our San Jose facility, and a facility in London. And we have a new one coming on in construction, going to go on live in Delhi very shortly. We provide services in 3 different areas: enterprise IoT connectivity for our customers, our platform as a service for people, MNOs who are deploying IoT solutions, and then, of course, the cloud applications, the analytic services that take the data and look at the content rather than just the connectivity. In terms of the markets we serve, 6 basic markets, and all of the traditional M2M and IoT applications that go into these markets, such as healthcare, automotive, telematics, consumer auto. We separate out telematics from consumer auto because we are putting in the trucking industry into the telematics area, et cetera, all the way down through utilities, point-of-sale systems, et cetera. The platform we have is a complete platform, single solution for all the customers, ranging from the data and connectivity services we provide all the way up to the application enablement and the connectivity enablement. And the transport we provide is a service using cellular as a long-range transport, 2G, 3G, CDMA, and GSM, as well as 4G LTE. And obviously, there are companies who have deployed hybrid solutions using short-range wireless solutions such as Wi-Fi, et cetera, and or satellite solutions in remote areas where cellular may not be available. So the platform we have, it's as mentioned on the bottom, we are providing a cellular connectivity service using our own core network. The AirCore system was something we developed and deployed ourselves. Above that is the airport platform for managing the devices out there, and above that is the AirCloud and AirVoyance data storage and application enablement platform, as well as the analytics engine. Presently, we have deployed a demonstration of the kind of device usage metrics that we take for our own network monitoring, and providing billing analytics as a capability to demonstrate what customers can do with their own data. And of course, everything is accessed through an API for the applications themselves. Everything in our system is accessible through that. On the bottom right, you also see the fact that we provide the entire charging and billing engine. And recently, about a year ago, we deployed our online M2M IoT services where you can essentially get started with an M2M and IoT solution. As long as you have a certified radio or device, you can get a SIM from us and get operational within 24 hours. So let's dive into what security is all about. First of all, an important point to be mentioned is that security is different for different people. It's a complex issue. It isn't just the concept of making sure that the data is private, for example. What are the privacy laws that might exist in some countries for individuals and personnel? It also has to do with laws and regulations that might apply. Might have to deal with corporate safety or personal safety involved with human beings whose data release might cause a problem. And of course, the issues associated with how do you detect that you've had a problem with security, how do you resolve a security issue, lots of topics that go into this concept, overarching concept of security. So we can't touch on all of them, but we'll certainly give it a good shot of trying to address some of the issues that we see happening in the M2M and IoT space, and then what you might do to mitigate the issues that can occur. Another point I want to mention, and I'll sort of lead into that point by mentioning that generally speaking, security risks can be recognized and understood relatively straightforwardly. So you can plan correctly from the start. Now, when I say relatively, because there will always be new things that come up that you don't understand, or new ways that threats can develop that you may not be able to resolve up front. The idea should be that we can detect these security risks relatively quickly and efficiently, try to resolve them fairly quickly. We can try to manage them, we can try to control them, and hopefully the security methods that we have developed in the past few years can be used reliably with confidence. But here's the real bottom line. The final point I will make is that you can never completely eliminate a security risk, simply because threats are changing, they are evolving. So if you have an expectation to be able to deploy a perfectly secure IoT application, it's just simply not going to happen. You should assume, and this is the important point, you should assume that some problem will occur that will require a solution to be developed and it require a solution to be deployed potentially to a IoT device that's out there to secure it in a better way, to change its security dynamic so that something that has become a new threat can be taken into account. And that has some interesting repercussions on the devices that you might deploy in the field for a particular M2M or IoT application. So let's make sure we understand what I call the four principles that we're dealing with when I talk about security and how to balance them. Basically, principle one, you have to authenticate the sender and the receiver, meaning is the correct device transmitting the data that you're expecting to get? Is the correct server receiving the data? And vice versa, if you have the server sending some control messages to the device, can the device be assured that the correct server is giving it the information that's necessary for it to perform its M2M or IoT function? You have to ensure that that authentication process is about as robust as you can get so that you don't cause a problem later on. With the trust in the data content, which is principle number 3 on that page. The second thing is that the network should be available. The sender and receiver generally should be accessible when you need to. So you need to have a reliable connection. If you don't have a reliable connection, how do you know your data that you need to send is being received properly? You don't unless you have some kind of assurance that the network is available when you need it. That is an issue that you need to take into account. Finally, I shouldn't say finally, the third bullet, the trust in the data content. You have to make sure that the data was received correctly. If you cannot trust the content, then the act of sending the data becomes kind of meaningless. And you have to make sure that when the device receives a control message, that control information that is being used to perhaps configure a change in the device is received properly. That's very, very important to make sure that the data content is trusted in a security solution. And of course, the confidentiality, which is where privacy comes in, that only the intended recipients receive the data and then it's not allowed to be accessed by anybody else, whether it's at the ends where the data is being received or in the chain from the device on through the server. And of course, there's always a balance here because if you try to implement the perfect IoT solution, it may become cost ineffective to be able to do so. So you have to balance that. You may have a scenario where a complex solution will increase your security, but it may cost a lot of money, and you have to decide exactly where that compromise might need to be made between the cost and the complexity of the device. It might take you longer to get to market if you're implementing a very complex security solution that gives you better security, but now you've delayed your product to where may not be as competitive because some other product has arrived that meets the same application goals but doesn't necessarily have the same high security that your devices might. There's always a balance over here, and I try to address that in the next few slides to give you an idea of why the objective of making sure that you understand how to implement a particular degree of security can be judged, and that's something that will give you some ideas on how to assess that. One of the things that I would like to point out is that this is a complete chain. You have the sources of information, which is typically a sensor or a smart device of some sort, possibly a gateway if it's receiving information from a multiplicity of sensors inside a house or a business, all the way through the other end where there's some process or a human being or some automatic response system that is receiving that data and sending control messages back perhaps. And there's the transport on the left from the source, which could be either a short-range wireless transport, maybe a cellular transport, or a satellite transport. And indeed, you can include in there non-wireless transports. It might be an Ethernet connection into the system. Then you have the network infrastructure, which is where typically the identity management occurs, the provisioning of the device that is managed out in the field, the authentication as data is transported, the authorization for what kind of services it might be trying to get to, etc. That's where all the control messages may also be generated from the perspective of network control functions for the device, or it may include the fact that the system or the recipient has sent some control message back to change the operation of the device. And the point I'm trying to make with this slide is that there are various points over here in the data chain, various elements in the data chain that are subject to risk. There are traditional methods that have been applied to host systems or the internet, which is a big deal not only in the M2M and IoT space. Security is a big deal for implementation for applications that are not related to IoT. And those kinds of traditional solutions, those kind of experts who are out there who can provide the security solutions for those host systems and servers on the internet is something that is very commonly, relatively commonly available to be able to get some consulting help or to find a company that provides a solution for that area. It's the other end of the chain where we need to spend some more time on how to implement security solutions perhaps in the devices and gateways. Now, in general, the comment I might make is that sensors tend to be fairly small, fairly not powerful necessarily, and fairly low amount of code that needs to be protected. Maybe the firmware is so specific to a particular solution that trying to protect it in ways that would prevent a security breach to occur may not be as necessary, whereas the transport, the network infrastructure, and onwards might have perhaps a higher degree of risk and therefore a better opportunity and perhaps even more processing power available to implement a security solution. You need to understand all of these access points and design for threats upfront for any one of them. Now, how do you assess what level of security you should implement? The point of this chart is to show you, and I'm just taking two of the potential axes over here, not cost perhaps. In this case, I'm taking the axis of how many people might get affected and how many systems might get affected. And if there is a breach, what kind of impact could occur? Perhaps there's little to no impact, or perhaps there's a tremendous amount of problems that can get created if if an IoT application is breached. So on the bottom left, you might have a scenario where the fact that a particular device or sensor gets compromised, very few people might be affected. Maybe nobody's affected really, and there's no life-threatening issue that is created. You really don't have a major security problem to deal with, and therefore your implementation of a security solution may not be as costly or may not be as effective as you might implement for a much more serious issue. Upper right, the extreme end, where if you have a security breach where many, many people are affected and you could create a serious problem with large impactful problem where you can potentially have fatalities or people who get affected by a particular problem or a security breach of a system, then you may want to take a significant amount of understanding, develop a significant amount of understanding and take some action to prevent a breach in the first place. place. So let's see where you can, in this chart, where would you fit a typical application? Let's take a look at the kinds of applications that have been deployed, all the way from simple data gathering applications, perhaps from a sensor that takes temperature readings at a house, all onto the far right, where maybe you're managing a food or water supply chain, where you're implementing an IoT solution that measures the quality of a particular water distributor or distribution system, and fit that into this chart. Then you can get an understanding of the amount of effort you need to put in to implement a security solution. Typically, simple data gathering solutions may affect a few people, and if you have an incorrect data, or if you have a device that's been compromised, you have relatively little impact. On the other hand, as we have seen from examples that took place in the U.S., for example, with water problems, when you have a system that has got some serious issues with water, you can end up with a large number of people who've been affected. And in this case, it was the Flint, Michigan incident, where the water supply is causing serious problems for the people over there. And it wasn't detected for a long, long time. So that was effectively an inadvertent breach, but certainly a breach that needed to be taken into account. And in general, I've just given you a few examples over here. In general, you can figure out where your application fits and implement a solution that is cost-effective for that kind of issue. Now, the concept of consumer security and privacy are slightly different. The privacy needs are related to security requirements, but they're not exactly the same thing. What we have observed is that companies are overlooking some of the security issues, not necessarily the privacy issues, and where a potential for harm can be created. I'll give you an example of this. Some years ago, there were these internet-connected two-way baby monitors that had both a video stream as well as an audio stream that parents were using for monitoring their children in their own room. And what was happening was that these systems were getting breached, and there were some serious incidents that took place where people broke into these monitors and basically started addressing the kids and were able to talk to the kids, see what the room was where the kids were located, and in some cases were be able to determine the name of the child and address them by name, and create some serious problems. We had people who were doing, using profanity in their language and yelling and screaming at the kids, which was, I think, a serious potential for harm. And you need to worry about implementing a security solution that you can avoid that kind of incident, basically. In general, consumers, which is where IoT starts coming in, must be protected. We have plenty of adults who don't understand the impact of security breaches, and yet we're expecting children to deal with it. There was a product introduced last year called the Talking Barbie, which has been around for a long, long time. But this particular product allows the child to address questions into the doll. There's a microphone on the doll that receives the child's words, which is sent on to a server where it is analyzed, and then a response is sent back for the child, for the doll to talk back to the child, for the child to interact with the doll. But you can imagine that if there's some security breach, particularly because the data is now being sent to a server somewhere on the internet, you can imagine what could happen if that server gets hacked into, and then information about the child, or being able to take it over and respond back with the incorrect information, or worse yet, something bad to the child could occur. The point is that consumers who don't necessarily understand the impact of these kinds of breaches are problematic enough, and now we have to expect children to deal with it, and who are not going to understand what is happening. And therefore, we need to put together a security solution that's more effective than just a simplistic, oh, I've got an application, wonderful IoT application, and I'm going to use it for my consumer product without thinking about the security problems that could occur. In general, any enterprise that is marketing a consumer IoT product must think about implementing security right up front during the design of the application, the device, with a very, very, very careful analysis of the consequences of a breach. What could happen? What could go wrong? And let's see if we can figure out a way to prevent it, to mitigate the problem if it occurs, and of course resolve it in the future. So the point is that where privacy is important, and it is a big deal for many, many identity theft-like scenarios, for example, we must ensure that there is general public safety along with those reasonable privacy expectations, where consumers are protected in applications and devices where they may not be expecting a problem to occur. So basically, the way we've approached this is we've said there are 4 places where we can achieve end-to-end security for an IoT application. And I'll talk about each of these briefly, but the idea is that you can segregate the traffic, isolate applications that don't necessarily need to talk to each other. Make sure the network is whitelisted, meaning that you allow things only if they're specific to that application. And of course, I'm going to go through a couple of more of these in the slides, so let me just dive ahead instead of going to the details and to this overall picture here. So traffic segregation. The idea that we have implemented is that we want to make sure that a traffic that is intended from one application to go through a specific device isn't allowed to communicate with some other device on the network. We make sure that traffic not only within the device to that application is blocked, but also within devices from a device to another device. So devices on the network cannot communicate with any other device. Public access is generally blocked. It's an application that's running on a server somewhere. And of course, this protects against any kind of a mobile-to-device breach or a device-to-device breach if a particular device is compromised and taken over. And so you make sure that the specific application that's talking to that device is the only one that's talking to that device. The other thing we do is that we make sure from the network perspective that the access control of a particular device is only to the application associated with that device. So at the network, we define who is allowed to talk to that device and then block everything else. We define the server on the other side that might receive the device and then block all the other servers from getting access to the device, unless it is a necessary part of a redundant solution, in which case we make sure that that's possible as well. But it is a specific act to open the device rather than to allow everything to get through. We make sure that everything is properly whitelisted so that the device and the application communicate and nothing else happens. So nothing else is allowed. Everything else is blocked. Finally, detecting the anomaly, detecting any kind of a problem is an essential part of a security solution. If you do not know that you have been breached, then you cannot implement a solution or a resolution or try to change the device or the application to accommodate the fact that the breach might have occurred. So we have to detect for that. So what we do is we baseline the communications to those devices. And one of the nice things about M2M and IoT devices in general, although not necessarily for some of the consumer IoT that may be coming along, is that they have regular patterns. You can watch for those patterns. You can detect if a device is deviating from those patterns and make some kind of a decision, analyze the content, perhaps analyze who is accessing the device to see if there has been a breach, and therefore should you shut off access to that device, whether it's in an automated way or whether it's in a controlled manner by a decision made by somebody. As a trivial little example, which is not related to security, one of the things we do in our network is we monitor the traffic usage patterns of every device against the plan that it's operating against. And the customers who are involved in deploying that application have the control and the ability to set these limits where if a device is using more data than it's supposed to, it automatically gets shut off. Now, that's not a security reason. That is more of a cost and control reason. But regardless, the same principles apply, which is that you can look at content, you can look at the source of the data and make decisions, perhaps in an automated way, to shut off access to the device at the network level so that if a device has perhaps been breached, then it cannot impact other devices. So if you have a device that is transmitting incorrect information, it's shut off from the application to prevent any problems at the application and vice versa. And of course, multi-stage verification. One of the things that we are working on, this is not yet fully deployed, but it is a capability that we believe is very essential, is that we can create an out-of-band message that would allow validation, authentication, and verification of any information that is being sent. In the event that a device needs to be updated specifically for perhaps a security breach or perhaps even to add a new feature, one of the things we believe is in that we need to make sure that that update process is as secure as possible. So we're looking at ways to implement an out-of-band message inside the SIM so you can send it a message which tells the system, that tells the device, to get prepared for an OTA update, and then it will respond appropriately to that request without saying to itself, aha, I've got a security breach here. Somebody's trying to do an OTA update without a control or without a check and balance of whether or not that OTA update was indeed requested. So the server would send a separate out-of-band message with a unique key, and of course the architecture provides a fair amount of security in case the OTA server is spoofed, and of course any kind of malicious software is downloaded. So if you can, one of the principles of security is that if you can send an out-of-band control message or an out-of-band check verification of some sort that is different from the main process that is being used for perhaps the update in this particular case, then you can invalidate the attempt and therefore prevent any kind of a security problem in the first place. So to summarize, in these 4 areas, there are various places that we attempt to provide security checks and balances and security systems that would enable our customers to be comfortable that the device is operating in a secure manner, that the application is operating in a secure manner. On the network itself, in the hardware and software, meaning that if you wanted to do encryption, you could choose to do so on the application. And of course through monitoring, which is essential, and then over-the-air updates to resolve a security problem that might have occurred. So let me give some final thoughts, and then we can get into the questions. One of the things I strongly believe is that security issues could become a barrier to IoT adoption if there is a widespread breach that we have not taken into account. So we encourage all of the people who are deploying solutions in our network to very carefully think through of the impact of a compromise. If there is a bad problem, and by bad problem I mean that people are impacted or there's some kind of human fatality that can occur, then that can cause a black eye that would have a serious problem for consumer IoT adoption. The trust in the applications and the data is important. So you need to make sure you can prevent the problem from occurring in the first place, or because problems can be unique, you may be able to detect the issue and resolve it as quickly as possible. One of the challenges that people always have is that how do you change the device that might be deployed out in the field, because if you have a tremendously large number of devices that are already out there, you have to perform IoT updates. And we believe that people need to take that into account and therefore implement systems that would allow the firmware of the device or the application software of the device to be changed after the fact, after it's been deployed. Something we've noted is that today security is still an afterthought, but it is changing. Ideally, you must architect and implement it during the design, particularly for any application that could have a serious impact if it was breached. So I do believe that end-to-end security is possible by implementing the best known security practices at all points in the chain. Traditionally, the likely place for a security problem to occur is probably in the network, probably at the servers and the applications, and that's where there are plenty of solutions that can be applied. And again, the important point I will repeat and continue to repeat is that it will not be perfect. You must plan for updates. You must be able to make sure your devices can be changed out as necessary for a security breach or a security compromise of some form or fashion, not just feature updates. So Robin, that's pretty much the basic information that I would add on the topic of security, and then we can dive into details and the questions perhaps. And if anyone has any question of what we've done to implement and help for these kinds of security solutions, that would be great.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's over to you, Jeremy, if you were going to ask the questions.
It is indeed, and thank you very much, gentlemen. Mike, you've given us a lot of food for thought. It is time now for questions from the audience, and I can see that you've clearly encouraged our attendees to send in a heck of a lot of questions. We've got plenty of time, so there's always time for more questions. Keep sending them in, and if we can, we'll get them answered in this session, and if we can't answer every question now, we will pass your question on to our speakers afterwards, and they can always respond to you offline on a one-to-one basis. Gentlemen, thanks. The first thing I wanted to ask, this is a question that really tackles the sort of the entirety of it. You talked about there not being a perfect security solution, Z, and you've made that point very clear. Is it therefore that we should be looking at an appropriate level of security, not maximum security for every situation? I'm thinking of the difference between M2M vending and health critical apps for connected care like diabetes or heart care.
Absolutely agreed. I think that healthcare is an excellent example of that. I think that the IoT implementations in the healthcare arena are still not doing what I call mission critical or health critical applications yet. And the reason they're not doing that is for a variety of purposes. First one is that the nature of mission critical healthcare solutions is that if a breach occurs, it could lead to a fatality if there's a wrong kind of compromise. And that has led people to be very careful about the kinds of applications that can be used in that area. So you see, there was an example a few years ago reported at a Black Hat conference conference here in the United States, of where an insulin pump, an automated insulin pump for a diabetic patient, was taken over and compromised by somebody who was able to access that device. I forget whether it was Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It may have been Wi-Fi, but the point was that they could access the device within a certain range and then have that pump start pumping insulin into the patient. And they were just demonstrating this, obviously, so it wasn't to a live patient. But the fact that the manufacturer of this device hadn't thought through a simple encryption scheme that could have blocked this kind of breach was something that was very disconcerting. And I think that people need to take that into account. And, you know, if I have a vending application where a product might be dispensed because of a breach, it's less of an issue than if I have a mission-critical healthcare application. I think the closest we have come to a mission-critical application in our network so far has been monitoring of the automatic defibrillators, if you will, located at libraries and airports, which are very commonly used here in the United States, where anyone can use these automated devices for people who are having heart attacks. Well, you might not want to trigger the heart attack using an IoT application that's compromised, but the act of monitoring and diagnosing that the device is working properly as intended can be a completely simple and useful IoT application, so that you don't have to dispatch a tech every month to go out there and check whether the device is working properly or not.
Yes,
Robin, if I could just, you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think that this thing about appropriate security is really, really important, because you can't build economically for maximum security on every single application, because you'll just not get to the right sort of cost-benefit analysis for many applications. It has to be the appropriate level of security for that application. And that's relatively easy, or no, it's not easy, but it's relatively tameable, if you like, for an M2M application where there is a single stream of data coming from a single stream of devices. As I was saying in my introductory slides, it gets much more complicated when you start to mix data streams from different sectors, as I was saying, some of which may have higher security requirements than others. And there you have to start looking at what is the overall security requirements for that. And that might mean then that you need to increase the security on relatively low security requiring elements of the application, because you need to have an overall high level of security for the ones that are more mission critical, perhaps. So you need to look at each solution as you go on. And I think that Z's sort of balance thing, he showed a matrix earlier on showing high impact, low impact, is a really good way of looking at it, because it forces you to think about just how secure you need to be for any particular eventuality.
Thank you. Here's a question from a well-known service provider. Do you have any special security measures related to SIM cards?
That's a darn good question. Yes, and I think that we're continuing to think about that some more at this point. As I mentioned, we're looking at ways of using that for out-of-band authentication and verification of activity for a device that could make it unsecure if you're not careful, such as an OTA update. It'd be tough for me to go into lots of details in that area, partly because I think that some of that is still evolving at this point.
Yeah, fair enough. One of the points that is raised by a delegate here is that we didn't include privacy in the poll. It does sometimes get lumped with security, perhaps wrongly, but what was your thinking on that? Would you like, in future polls, shall we include privacy?
Let me address that one, and Robin, if you can add your points to it. I think that that's a very good point. I deliberately did not introduce privacy in there, because privacy has different meanings for different people, and not only that, has different meanings for different countries as well. Regulatory privacy issues in certain countries is entirely different from other regulatory privacy issues in other countries, as well as the particular application. I mean, there are examples of medical privacy which are very different from financial privacy. For example, identity theft is a big deal, So I wanted to leave that off, but keep in mind that implementing privacy is often an issue related more to non-M2M and IoT devices, although I think it's becoming that way as we find applications that are gathering data on individuals, perhaps. The effort to anonymize data related to an IoT device, I think, is ongoing. It's very application specific, so it would have to be looked at just about every time you develop and deploy a new application. Robin, would you add to that in the general, more general way, or would you disagree perhaps on what I commented?
No, I wouldn't disagree at all. I think it's a different dimension really from security, privacy, and it applies in different amounts to different applications. So you might have a high security requirement, and you might have a high privacy, or you might have a low privacy requirement related to that, or you might have a low security requirement but a high privacy requirement. And that would be, I think, probably more typical for a consumer application. So it is a different dimension, and it's not really very well understood, I think, as you say, Z, as to how to flex that solution for different requirements. So what we may end up with, in fact, for privacy is maximum privacy for everything.
Yes,
because
that's a
it's very
default.
difficult to give gradings for it. It's probably easier to give gradings for security, though, because I think it's easier to define what the requirements are and how to draw high cost security versus relatively lower cost security.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think that one of the comments I might add is that it really depends on the application. You know, while we consider some of the financial problems that have occurred with credit card theft as a major privacy and security issue, yes, but it hasn't caused a fatality, whereas a medical healthcare device could have a problem where if it's taken over and a breach occurs, you could end up with people who are affected, seriously affected.
Yes.
We're doing okay for time, still plenty, and there are more questions still coming in, which is great. Here's one from a company in France. Have you seen any emerging standards or open source within the IoT market that will help advance the use of security during IoT vendor product implementations? Best for you, I would have thought, Z. Robin,
yes, best for Z, that one, yes.
Okay, there is let's put it this way. At this point, it is still an evolving state. So the answer may be a little bit not as certain as the questioner might like to have answered, but still, the point is that there are efforts going on. In particular, there is an organization called M2M, which is a standards development body effort. The 7 STOs, major STOs around the world, including the Europeans, the Japanese, Koreans, and the United States, have gotten together and created a body that is working on IoT architectures in general. And one of the major aspects of that architecture definition was the issue of security. So they put together a set of requirements and a set of proposed solutions that I don't think are quite there yet, but it'll certainly evolve from what they have achieved so far. So I would highly encourage people to go look at that. It's the website is pretty straightforward, m2m.org, and you can go find the architecture specification that they have released. It's publicly available, and if you look through that, you'll get an idea of what people are thinking about. Now, it is a general document, so you still need to look at specifics, but at least it helps you understand what the expectations from people are for the people who are developing and deploying IoT applications.
Yeah. I would also add to that you might want to have a look at what has already been said by M2M, and for that, just go to the IoT Now website. There's a really interesting question here from a North American company. Do you recommend segmenting data and control traffic within a single application, given that it's easier to secure stroke encrypt data versus control? This is one for you, Z.
Yes, I think it is possible. In particular, it depends on where that control message traffic is coming from. If it is from a network control point, such as what we do, we try to isolate that from the data path, definitely. But if it's a data path that is being used by the application, by the server, then yes, you could also make a choice in certain ways. For example, if you're using an IP connectivity for your data, you might want to use an SMS message for some kind of control function or some kind of key function. function, like what we do in our SIM, is completely independent of the IP data to manage the OTA update of the SIM that's out there. This doesn't always work, but it is certainly possible. The only other comment I might make is that when you choose to use encryption, depending on the smartness, the ability, the processor performance of the sensor or the device, you have to be very careful as to match what you need out there, because if you need a larger processor, more memory, etc., you could end up with a cost problem, and if the application doesn't justify implementation of that level of security, then you might be overdoing it. But if appropriate, always err on the side of more care than not.
There's another question with a technical bias, this time from a data processing company. Is anyone here using Julia Lang in a production system for analyzing data?
Very interesting. Sorry, Jeremy, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I think that assuming the gentleman is asking about, and I shouldn't presume here, the gentleman or lady is asking about the language Julia, I do not know. It is a very interesting new language that I'm aware of. I have not seen anybody implement a particular security solution or data analytics solution today.
And the same gentleman has snuck in an extra question, which we'll allow him. Are you using join calculus for distributed programming?
No, that I have absolutely no idea how to answer. Robin? Do you?
No, neither do I.
We might have to take that one offline. There's another question in here that looks at the sort of the big picture. Security, some say, should be designed into an IoT service from the start. Z, what do you do if the ecosystem brings together pre-existing elements, things like devices, gateways, and so on?
Very good. Robin, I think you will also need to address this one from your perspective of what's happening out there. The way we look at it is that if you're using a device that has been marketed, a pre-developed device, some kind of a product from one of the major suppliers of a solution, such as a modem, etc., then in general, they might have taken the security issues into account. However, depending on your application, you may well want to speak to those individuals that are deploying that device and find out if the implementation of security in their system is adequate for what you're trying to do, and analyze it. Again, go back to the analysis concept of what will happen if a breach occurs. And I totally understand that this is not always easy for a device that's already been deployed, trying to make a change that's to a product that's been released by somebody else. But it's essential, because if a breach could lead to a problem, then you really need to make sure that that device is the right device for your application, and therefore is modified or updated or changed in some way to accommodate detection or resolution if a breach does occur for your application. And again, if a company thinks about it from the start, when you're trying to implement a security solution from in the design phase, that is absolutely the right place to be asking these questions, not after the fact.
That's right, and we're always going to have the situation, as you were pointing out, Z, in your presentation, that whatever you design in, and if you bring together different securities that are designed by different people into one solution, there's always going to be, at some stage, you've got to assume there's going to be some sort of vulnerability, and that it is attacked, and that it does go down. And it's then how you recover from that, how you can address the issue that has been attacked, how you can upload a solution to that, and then recover the system from that. And that may need to be, in the future, done fairly automatically, not manually. So it becomes more complex as the solutions become more complex, and we start to rely on them more as well, for example, for mission-critical applications and so forth. So I think that this designing in from the start is a fundamental issue. Really need to assume that. It's very difficult to add security after the fact. There's always going to be a vulnerability if you do that. So I think that to some extent, upgrading may need changing out some equipment as well to be able to ensure that the security is at the right level.
That's an interesting one. There's another strategic question here, which will therefore, I hope, be of interest to a number of people. I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, because time is running out, to keep your answers to 30 seconds each, and we'll have to make this the last one, I'm afraid. It's in the rush to market, security continues to be overlooked in developing products and services for IoT. The questioner wants to know, what are your thoughts about regulation and penalties for failing to properly incorporate security up front in all development efforts? So is there a kickback if people don't do it right?
Very interesting. As you can tell from the recent flap with the Apple and FBI here in the U.S., people might answer that in different ways.
Yeah.
I think the overall, I would like to say that we have to figure out the right balance for the security of the application. And if a breach occurs, how do you go about fixing it? But trying to penalize people for a ever-changing market is going to be tough to do, and I think downright impossible to regulate or penalize.
Yes, I would say the same. It's not really possible to regulate it. I think the market will decide, actually. So if there is a vulnerability that's seen in a product and it's seen not to cope, then that will have an impact on the supplier. And they will then need to rectify that. So it's, in a way, partially self-regulating.
And the only other comment I might add is that one of the fastest growing markets that is in existence today is the healthcare market, where there are independent regulations not having to do with security or compromises, which have to be taken into account. And it is the most rapidly growing market that I know of.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Very fair comment with a highly regulated market. We've run out of time. We've got enough questions here for another 20 minutes, and I'm going to pass them straight to you, Z, and to you, Robin, so that you can get back to the questioners yourselves. But the aim of this webinar has been to hear about these tools and to assess IoT security vulnerabilities, and I think we've done that. And most of all, to learn how to protect your information. During the panel discussion, we've also uncovered some of the pain points. And if you're anything like me, you've certainly learned from these experiences in the IoT. So it's somewhere new, and it's growing, and we're all still learning about it. We are almost out of time, so I'd just like to remind everybody, please keep an eye on the website at iot-now.com. You can stream this webinar from the site very soon, and meanwhile you'll find the latest news there, plus blogs and videos. It just remains for me to say a really big thank you to our speakers. Robin Duke-Woolley, who is CEO of Beecham Research. Thank you, Robin.
That's very great. Thanks very, Jeremy.
And, of course, to Z Hussain, CTO of Eris. It's been great to have your thoughts, Z.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Robin. Appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Most of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'd really like to thank you for joining us wherever you are today. Keep safe, and we really do appreciate the time you spent with us. From everyone here at IoT Now, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.